I give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Madam President, allow me to express my sincere appreciation for your diligent leadership of the Council during this month. I also wish to thank USG Huang Chia, Special Envoy of Secretary General for the Great Lakes region of Africa, and Ms. Joyce Musia, ASG for Humanitarian Affairs, for their briefing. I also recognize the presence of Petronil Vaveka and also Honorable Esmeraldas Mendoza, Secretary of External Affairs of Angola. Let me also commend Council members and fellow colleagues for their statements. Excellencies, for 100 days, starting from 7th April 2024, we are commemorating the 30th remembrance of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. I wish to take this opportunity to thank all of you for continuing to stand with us during this period as we remember and honor the memory of our 1 million innocent lives that perished in the genocide. I invoke this tragedy because the effects of the heinous 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda continues to have an impact on the situation in the Great Lakes region of Africa. The genocidal extremists who committed genocide in Rwanda reorganized in the former Zaire, now DRC, and continue to spread genocide ideology throughout the region, and specifically in eastern DRC, targeting Congolese Tutsi. Surprisingly, some actors that are well versed with this reality tend to ignore it and instead advance a biased narrative targeting the government of Rwanda in an apparent systemic denial and protection of genocidaires. We salute regional countries that have continuously shown unwavering support for the political solution to the crisis in Eastern DRC in line with peace, security, and cooperation framework, and urge the international community to support regional initiatives. The situation in the Great Lakes region of Africa has been volatile due to the activities of various armed groups based in Eastern DRC. Most United Nations and non-government organizations reports have over the years documented over 120 armed militia groups in DRC. However, a more accurate figure is provided in the DRC government-authored Disarmament, Demobilization, Community Integration, and Stabilization Program, the so-called PDDRCS report of 2023, which documented over 250 local and 14 foreign armed groups in DRC. They include the US and UN Security Council sanctioned FDR and its splinter groups, which poses a security and existential threat to Rwanda. FDR also, as I mentioned, is the mastermind of the ethnic cleansing of Congolese Tutsi and is responsible for the heinous human rights violation in DRC. This is a continuation of the heinous crimes that they committed in Rwanda, which were then exported into the Eastern DRC. And this is one of the root causes of the problems in Eastern DRC. These armed groups, the 250 local and 14 foreign, continue to exploit governance gaps and lack of political will by the DRC government to address the root causes of the conflict. The fact that the genocidal FDLR and its splinter groups is embedded with DRC Army, the FARDC, which arms and provides them with military, logistical, financial, and political support is of serious concern to Rwanda. This is because FDLR causes a direct and existential threat to Rwanda's security and territorial integrity. Excellencies, the current situation in DRC, where there is a cocktail of armed groups, coupled with the DRC government orchestrated proliferation of weapons and ammunition to unruly Mai Mai militia groups, which have been dubbed Wazalendo, continue to pose insecurity in Eastern DRC. This destabilizes neighboring countries and has caused a humanitarian crisis with an influx of refugees to neighboring countries, especially in Rwanda, where we have over 100,000 Congolese refugees, Uganda, and Kenya, among other countries. The support of the DRC government to armed groups, including the genocidal FDLR, contradicts the spirit of the peace, security, and cooperation framework and other regional peace initiatives. This irresponsible militarization of the conflict has further been heightened by the deployment of the Force de Défense Nationale Burundaise, the FDNB, the SADC-led SAMI DRC, and mercenaries as an offensive force fighting alongside FARDC, FDLR, and Wazalendo militia, which already have a record of human rights violations, including ethnic cleansing of Kinyarwanda-speaking Congolese. We wish to stress that any force that directly or indirectly corroborates and supports the genocidal FDLR is considered belligerent to Rwanda, as it poses a direct threat to the country's security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Madam President, Council members, I'd like to address an issue that has been brought out in this House, in this Council. The allegation that Rwanda attacks Monusco and peacekeepers is completely irresponsible and far-fetched. It's completely cooked up. How can Rwanda attack peacekeepers when we don't have a presence in DRC? On the contrary, this Council has material information and facts that certain Monusco forces have withdrawn from their position because of constant attack and shelling by FARDC and Wazalendo and SAMI DRC. The delegation who raised this matter in this Council has possession of this information. I also want to speak to Rwanda's role in peacekeeping. Rwanda makes significant sacrifices through its support to peacekeeping. Our young soldiers, our gallant soldiers, have made the ultimate sacrifice and have died in far-off lands, protecting civilians and preserving world peace as blue helmets. So we cannot turn around and harm blue helmets when we ourselves are one of the largest contributors to peacekeeping. And no one should think that our contribution to you in peacekeeping this is a sacrifice that we make. We make to have made a sacrifice. So it is not something that we take for granted. Madam President, Council members, I want to highlight that several initiatives have been undertaken to stabilize the Great Lakes region of Africa, including the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework, and recently the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. These initiatives provide a comprehensive solution to the crisis in Eastern DRC. Rwanda signed the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework because we believe that regional cooperation can provide lasting political solution to the conflict in DRC that continues to affect the entire region. We still believe that the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework can provide a solution to this conflict, and Rwanda is fully committed to its implementation. I want to assure the Chamber of this. In addition to this framework, Rwanda also fully supports other regional efforts, especially the Nairobi and Rwanda processes, which provide concrete measures to end the conflict in Eastern DRC. Nevertheless, the region continues to see worrisome evidence of the lack of political will by the DRC government to end the conflict. The continued militarization and evident preference of a military solution by DRC government should be a cause of serious concern to this Council. The persistent failure to address the root causes of the conflict has allowed Eastern DRC to remain a breeding ground for armed groups destabilizing the region for decades. Madam President, DRC has a long history of externalizing and blaming others, including its neighbors, for its internal problems. This comes back to the issue of lack of ownership, political will, and commitment to genuinely address its internal contradiction. DRC has had many political, security, and governance challenges for decades. Blaming its neighbors, and especially scapegoating Rwanda will not take those problems away. It is only by addressing the root causes of conflict in DRC that sustainable peace, security, and stability can be attained. Council members, Madam President, I'd like to emphasize that a military solution will not succeed under any circumstances. No level of militarization or state-orchestrated violence can provide a sustainable solution to the deep-rooted political problems in DRC and in the region. All efforts to address political problems with a military solution have previously failed and continue to plunge the region into unending security and humanitarian crisis. Rwanda is also alarmed by the growing hate speech and inhuman atrocities targeting the Congolese Tutsi community in eastern DRC. These acts of ethnic cleansing and deliberate hounding of a targeted group from their ancestral lands and denying them inherent citizenship rights and property should not be overlooked or underestimated by members of this esteemed council, especially given the history of our region. Madam President, Rwanda's position in support of peaceful resolution to the conflict has always been clear. We have been, however, disturbed by continued political statements by presidents of DRC and Burundi calling for regime change in Rwanda. We take this threat seriously, given the prevailing cooperation between these governments and the genocidal FDR. I wish to emphasize that rhetoric around the sovereignty and territorial integrity of DRC without evoking the sovereignty and territorial integrity of neighboring countries affected by this conflict is completely misplaced and aimed at fueling conflict. I want to emphasize that every country's territorial integrity matters, so it cannot be one or the other. I'd like to conclude, Madam President, by saying that achieving a peaceful Great Lakes region requires addressing the root causes and drivers of the conflict in DRC. Rwanda remains fully committed to playing a constructive role in the search for peace and stability in the region. The Great Lakes region of Africa has tremendous potential, as was said in this room, and also has strong cultural and geographical connections. We strongly believe that peace and stability is a core prerequisite for growth, prosperity, and wealth creation in the region. You can fully count on Rwanda. We are committed to working with all partners and stakeholders towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Eastern DRC in line with regional mechanisms and the peace and security cooperation framework. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as it is the first time I'm participating in the Council's work this month, April 2024, allow me to congratulate your country, Malta, for its presidency of the Council, and I offer you, on behalf of my delegation and on my own behalf, all our best wishes for every success in leading the Council's work during this crucial time in the history of humanity. I am all the more honoured to be the spokesperson for my government in this mid-term review exercise of the Addis Ababa Framework Agreement. And I appreciate your decision to focus on looking at the situation in the Great Lakes region with a particular attention on promoting the participation of women in regional mediation efforts for peace. Allow me now to pay tribute to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his sustained commitment to peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region. I wish to add to these introductory comments a very special word for Ms. Joyce Musia, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. Madam President, I would also like to welcome the presence in this meeting of Her Excellency Ms. Esmeralda Bravo Mendoza, Secretary of State for External Relations of the Republic of Angola, and Ms. Petroni Raveka, my compatriot, who has been a mediator for peace in Ituri and is the winner of the American Peace Prize, Women Building Peace. Finally, allow me to thank Ambassador Wang Xia, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region, and I commend him for the quality of his briefing this morning. Madam President, my delegation has noted the report of the Secretary-General on the implementation of the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security and Cooperation for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region, document S/2024/278 of the 29th of March 2024. We have a number of observations and comments on this report, which I will return to as I go on. Madam President, for now, I invite you to note with me that the armed aggression my country is a victim to in the east has led to the displacement of over 7 million Congolese. The statistics are sickening. Over 70% of these are women and girls. These Congolese women are deprived of their basic vital needs and have lost all human dignity, many of them having been subjected to rape, sexual violence, and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, in particular in mining zones. This situation has exacted a high human price. 15 million deaths, and it is the work of a neighbouring country, Rwanda, whose intoxicating obsession with the abundant strategic resources lying beneath the soil of my country have led it to lose all sense of reason. This neighbouring country is persisting in continuing its criminal enterprise to procure colossal economic benefits. It is for this reason that all the peace initiatives taken at regional and international level have remained a dead letter. This applies in particular to the peace plan resulting from the Luanda and Nairobi peace processes. Rwanda is deliberately blocked the implementation of these processes so as to gain time and to seek to achieve its excessive ambition to build a zone of influence in the DRC, which it would transform into a colony for exploitation and settlement, from which it would control the Congolese institutions. These actions by Rwanda are unacceptable, and they violate regional peace and the tenets of the Addis Ababa Framework Agreement, which this country had, however, freely signed up to. Madam President, the major concern of the Congolese authorities in general and of the President of the Republic in particular remains to restore peace to the eastern part of the DRC. My delegation trusts that its bilateral and multilateral partners will proffer sincere and responsible support, not only in re-establishing the flouted dignity of Congolese women in general, but also with regard to the current peace efforts underway, with a view to re-establishing state authority under the leadership of the President of the Republic, His Excellency Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo. Restoring the dignity of Congolese women must certainly be a priority, but such action should ensure that prejudices and stereotypes are also overcome, so that Congolese women who are victims of violent armed conflict can use their experience to play a decisive role in conflict prevention and resolution. Allow me to underline the fact that the DRC fully signed up to the Women, Peace and Security agenda enshrined in Resolution 1325 of the 31st of October 2000. The women in the Great Lakes region are the main victims of the wars, aggression and conflicts, and it is important and just for them also to be involved in conflict management. The inclusion of women leaders in regional strategies for peace, reconstruction and mediation processes throughout the Great Lakes region is relevant because their participation in conflict prevention and resolution could have a positive impact before, during and after conflict. In this regard, my delegation encourages the efforts deployed by the Special Envoy, the Secretary-General, in the Great Lakes region, precisely to equip and bolster the capacities of women mediators in the Regional Forum of Women of the ICGLR. To close on this point, it must be acknowledged that the Addis Ababa Framework Agreement had not sufficiently integrated the dimension of the role of women in its implementation. To resolve conflict sustainably, it is fundamental to include and more fully extend the concept of gender in building peace in the Great Lakes region. The current process of revitalizing the Framework Agreement could offer an opportunity to adapt it to this reality. Madam President, regarding the implementation of the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security and Cooperation for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region, there is an obligation upon all signatory countries to reaffirm their political will to move towards the effective accomplishment of regional commitments, particularly that of neither tolerating, helping nor supporting in any way armed groups. The Democratic Republic of the Congo actively participates in current efforts to revitalize this framework agreement and stands ready to support the roadmap, which resulted from the Durban retreat in November 2023, as reviewed on the 1st and 2nd of February 2024 by the Technical Support Committee ahead of its validation during the upcoming high-level meeting of the Regional Oversight Mechanism, planned to be held in Uganda. However, Rwanda and the M23 are being guaranteed impunity and persist in respecting none of the engagements entered into, in not implementing the peace plan resulting from the Nairobi and Luanda processes, in not abiding by the recommendations of the international community, and in not responding to the repeated calls of the Security Council of the United Nations, of the African Union, the African regional communities and bilateral partners to withdraw from positions seized in the Congolese territories of Rutshuru, Masisi and Nyiragongo. Madam President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo continues to subscribe to regional efforts, particularly the Luanda and Nairobi processes. My country reiterates its request to the Security Council to support these processes by maintaining maximum pressure on Rwanda and the M23. Stepping up judicial cooperation in the Great Lakes region to combat impunity at regional scale through the comprehensive implementation of the Kinshasa Declaration signed in June 2022 is an important point. The DRC also reiterates its request to the Council regarding the threats posed by foreign armed groups. Our request that each region concerned should be able to set up mechanisms, put the conditions in place to take responsibility in their own territories for their own rebels who have so plundered the east of the DRC. And our request that at the next meeting, the Security Council ask the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General in the Great Lakes region to make a detailed report on this specific point. To conclude, I wish to reassure the Council that the DRC is a country very much attached to peace and respectful of the provisions of international law and the values of the United Nations Charter, and will continue to contribute constructively to regional peace efforts. The DRC will not waver in its vision. It will bolster its economic and integration cooperation with only serious and sincere partners for a Great Lakes region which will win out and block all forms of brazen predation. Madam President, allow me in a few words to respond to the confusion that the representative of Rwanda has been sowing in the minds of Council members, which were so enlightened earlier in the meeting. Because the representative of Rwanda has brought into the debate unverified elements, which are very close to being lies. Firstly, with regard to the Rwandan genocide of 1994, he underlined that this genocide had consequences on the territory of the DRC. And I would like to underpin and underscore a number of elements there. It is quite true that the Rwandan genocide led to more negative impact on the Congolese territory than on the Rwandan territory, for one simple reason. Since this genocide happened in Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has been subjected to repeated massacres of Rwandan troops on Congolese territory. So over 15 million Congolese people have died since then, although the Rwandan genocide led to just around 800,000 deaths. And of those 800,000, please note, there were no Tutsis. There were moderate Hutus and a third tribe concerned by this genocide. So we shouldn't just be talking about the Tutsi genocide, it was the Rwandan genocide. Secondly, the root causes of the conflict, because we're talking about this now. If we wish to look at the root causes of the current conflict, we need to look back at this genocide. But the genocide doesn't just start with the moment of the genocide. It started with an assassination, the killing of the Rwandan Hutu president at the time, Agarimana. That was where the genocide began. And who was responsible for that? This is what we call the root causes of the current conflict. You need to ask yourselves who killed the president. It was in Rwanda, between Rwandan people, not in the DRC. Madam President, allow me to come back to a question I've heard a lot about here. At the risk of polluting the minds of the Council. The Wazalendo. They wish to be we're hearing talk of assimilation into negative forces, a very negative movement and dangerous one. The Wazalendo are Congolese patriots, young ones, youth who have suffered from the horrors of war, whose parents have been raped, many of them by Rwandan troops on Congolese territory, whose parents have been killed in their presence, in front of. These are young people who have suffered from the horrors of war. And the only way of survival now is to protect the territory of their country. You saw the report that has been presented by OCHA today. How many children are being thrown onto the streets in the Uchura-Masisi territories? We are preparing the Wazalendos of tomorrow in this way. These children will become Wazalendo. But they shouldn't just be called negative forces. It would be dishonest to consider that people who are victims of an armed attack and are defending themselves be considered as an armed group. This is not what they are. Finally, contributions to peacekeeping. We have always contributed to peacekeeping in full respect of our agreements and everything that we have signed. But Rwanda has never respected anything, and the proof of that is that Rwandan troops are on Congolese territory as we speak. And the United States representative was right to ask Rwanda to withdraw its troops from the territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They're not doing this, but they come and brandish genocides and hate speech. They will not be listened to forever. I thank you, Madam President, for your patience. I thank you.
Of the DRC, and I now welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Esmeralda Mendonça, Secretary of State for External Relations of Angola. You have the floor.
Her Excellency Ambassador Vanessa Frazier, President of the Security Council, distinguished members of the Security Council, dear Mr. Wang Xia, Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations for the Great Lakes region, dear Ms. Joyce Musuya, Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, dear Mrs. Petroniel Waweka, Coordinator of Women Engaged for Peace in Africa, Excellencies. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the Republic of Malta on its presidency of the Security Council in April. Let me also commend the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, Mr. Wang Xie, for presenting the Secretary General report on the implementation of the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the Republic of Congo and the region, and a document that offers a comprehensive overview of the latest peace and security developments in that country and its regional implications. My thanks also go to Ms. Joyce Musuya, Assistant Secretary General